You don't see a lot of talk of Afghanistan in the mainstream press these days, but something significant happened recently. Hamid Karzai refused to sign something known as a BSA, a Bilateral Security Agreement, and as a result, Obama says that there will be harsh consequences for it. Take a look.
For American troops, the Afghan war will be over at the end of this year. The question is how they will go. They'd been hoping to leave a small force in place. But now President Obama has asked the Pentagon to draw up plans for a possible full withdrawal. That's because Mr. Obama has failed to convince the Afghan President Hamid Karzai to sign a Bilateral Security Agreement, or BSA, leaving the U.S. without a legal framework for continued operations.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Karzai's relationship with the U.S. is at an all-time low. His decision to free alleged Taliban militants against American wishes was only the latest sign of what he bluntly calls mutual distrust.
Now, as I mentioned, this hasn't been getting a lot of press, but what also hasn't been getting a lot of press is U.S. Approval ratings for the war in Afghanistan. So when we first invaded, Americans were all for it, and now more and more Americans would love a full withdrawal. In fact, if you look at 2001, 89% of Americans said that the war was not a mistake. They were in favor of it. Fast forward to 2014, 48% say that the war was not a mistake, meaning the majority of Americans think that it was a mistake. So I'm wondering what you think the consequences of this little scuffle will be, Mike. I mean, do you think that this is something that is actually going to be disastrous if Hamid Karzai refuses to sign the BSA?
Well, I think we need to be clear, first of all, the United States does not want to leave, and Karzai does not want the U.S. to leave. But they may be forced to leave, like what happened in Iraq. Just look at what the U.S. politicians are saying right now. You know, we're presented with this war as an unpopular war, one that people are against, and, you know, Obama was elected with many people thinking he was going to end that war, yet it's only extended. And now that we're at the end of the war, after that extension by Obama, we don't see the politicians and the generals saying to the Afghan government, yo, let us leave. We've been here long enough. You guys can handle us. Let us get out of here. They're going to the Afghan government and saying, you better let us stay. And not only that, you better let us stay and do whatever the hell we want in this country. Karzai is an illegitimate president, not recognized by the majority of Afghans, who's now a billionaire by looting the Afghan government. He doesn't, you know, he supports the U.S. He was in place because of the U.S., but he doesn't want to be the one to sign the agreement. He wants someone else to be able to sign it. So that's what's happening today. And so all the while this is happening, you have rich politicians on both the U.S. and the Afghan side deciding what's best for them in this situation, while many thousands of Afghans and U.S. service members are having their lives destroyed on a daily basis.
So, Jedi, I mean, that's kind of hard to follow up to, but I mean, what do you think is actually going to happen? I mean, there's some talk that, yeah, Hamid Karzai may not sign the BSA, but the elections are coming up next month, and maybe the new leader will do that.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's tricky to wait around for a new leader to sign an agreement like that. I mean, next month is the initial election, then there's a second election that occurs if someone doesn't get more than 50% of the vote. Then that could take until late into fall to figure out who's actually taking over. So Karzai's supposed to step down in May, but he's probably not going to. I mean, I just don't understand. I feel like a lot of people are shocked that this is happening. And I'm like, okay, all along our relationship with Karzai is we've said jump, and then he said, maybe later, but only if it looks like it was my idea. So, I mean, I just think I would assume that we would come to some sort of agreement, because I think that most parties believe that to have some troops there to support the efforts of the Afghan military is a good idea on both sides. I don't see this going to a full withdrawal.
Mm-hmm. So, Thaddeus, do you think that it is a good idea to avoid a full withdrawal?
No, I want them out now, and I always have. And I think that we have to understand why Obama will never want to leave entirely, which is that, for one reason, is that it's the only military base the United States has in Central Asia. Afghanistan touches it's either near or touches China, Pakistan, Russia, Iran, you know, very important strategic points in Central Asia. He wants, ideally, a permanent base. We know he's been negotiating with Karzai to keep permanent base there, and substantial number of troops. He does not want that. Another reason that Obama wants to be there is that people miss this. He is a Wilsonian idealist universalist. He wants to remake the world in the image of the United States. Read his writings. In 2007, he wrote an article in Foreign Affairs about this. He said the United States needs to lead the world. It needs to remake the world in our image. He called for a buildup in the U.S. military, and the Army, and the Marine Corps. He really wants the United States to be everywhere, very much like the neocons did under Bush. And this is a central strategic point for the United States. He does not want to leave. He may, as Mike said, may be forced to leave by the Afghan people, although the Karzai government, I'm also convinced, does not want him to leave either, because they are being propped up by the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, if the U.S. leaves, the Karzai government is completely screwed, because even though he's kind of been a thorn in the U.S. side every step of the way, he's seen as the U.S.'s guy to the entire country.
You know, when all is said and done, they're allies. They help each other out. So
Karzai is a complete puppet, but sometimes even the puppets come in contradiction with their puppet master, and that's what's happening.
Right. Do you think that there's an element of theater to it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Karzai playing this balancing act where, you know, he's the president of Afghanistan, where the people overwhelmingly oppose the U.S. presence, and not just the U.S. presence, but the regular slaughter of innocent people in night raids by special forces, by drones. And so Karzai has to be supporting the occupation because that's the only reason he's able to exist physically, but at the same time has to act as though, you know, he's condemning the United States for the actions that they're committing, when it's precisely those actions that are the reason that he's in power. So absolutely a lot of theater.
Well, I think we have to mention, too, that one of the reasons why it's seen as so dangerous by Karzai and other leaders in Afghanistan for the U.S. to completely remove all troops is because, contrary to what may be presented in the press, this has not been a success.
Exactly.
We did not win this war. So I just think when you look at the situation, yeah, when we leave, things are not going to go well. We've not won a lot of allies in the region other than the exact government that we've set up there. And the reality is, things like you mentioned, night raids, drone strikes, those things only breed terrorism. They make people wake up and say, hey, you know what, those people who killed my parents while they were at my uncle's funeral, maybe not my friends.
Yeah, you and Thaddeus make a really great point because, you know, there's this obsession, this neocon obsession, and the Obama administration's obsession with going into other countries, invading them, and making them the perfect image of what Americans consider a democracy to be. At the same time, we have issues with our own so-called democracy here, right, where we have severe violations of civil liberties and civil rights, and we need to deal with that. But what I'm wondering is, you know, when will it stop? Because we've invaded Afghanistan. There are several other countries that aren't democracies that violate certain rules and rights that we have here in the country. I mean, how far is this going to go? Are we constantly going to invade countries, in some cases preemptively, to fuel this ideology and also this military-industrial complex? Because there's a profit motive behind it as well. Thaddeus.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I slightly disagree with Jenny on this. I mean, I think in a way you could actually argue that Afghanistan has been successful for the United States in the way that Vietnam actually was, which is that we made a point to people, or we sent a message to people around the world. If you are going to take up arms against us, if you're going to rebel against us, we are going to go to war with you for as long as it takes. We are going to murder you for 13 years or maybe longer. We're going to prove to you that the price is too high to pay to rebel against the United States and our hegemony in the world.
Wouldn't you argue that that fuels more hostility toward the United States?
Absolutely, for sure, yeah, and that's why I oppose it.
So then how is that a success?
Right, well, I mean, it depends on whose side you're on, but I mean, I think from the perspective of the regime in the United States, I think you could argue that we sent the message to the brown-skinned people in the world, if you stand up against us, we're going to drop bombs on you for 13 years or maybe longer.
And it's an important parallel with Afghanistan and Vietnam, because just like Vietnam, in Afghanistan today, and actually many, many years ago, I mean, back in 2009, when President Obama, you know, gave his speech about the troop surge, which Robert Gates writes in his book Duty, Obama was very apprehensive about, which is a very kind of, if you're one of those soldiers being sent, you know, looking back at that, isn't the most heartening thing that you were being sent to a war that there was no real belief in, even by the political leaders who were sending you. But back then, years and years ago, just like in Vietnam, the military leaders and politicians acknowledged that their military objectives could not be completed in the country. So that military victory that they talked about was an impossibility, and they openly acknowledged it. But they didn't want to send the message that the biggest empire in the history of the world can be defeated by one of the poorest countries in the world. So they adopted a strategy of a slow motion retreat, where they essentially are retreating, they are withdrawing, they are saying, okay, we've lost militarily, but we're going to do it over many, many years, killing very, very many people in the process, and sending a lot of soldiers home in wheelchairs and coffins along the way as well.
I think there's an interesting thing when you have discussions like this. I think most Americans don't realize just how complicated situations are in countries like Afghanistan and geopolitically in the world. If you look right now, I don't even know how how, given current politics, a withdrawal is even physically possible, considering our route to get supplies out goes through Russia, who, guess what, we're not getting along with right now.
It was physically possible to withdraw from Vietnam. That's what the United States did. It eventually withdrew entirely, and I think that was a good thing. Even though it resulted in, yes, a communist regime in Vietnam, that was not our business to liberate that country.
Oh, I mean, like, we're going to leave behind billions of dollars in supplies if we don't cooperate with Russia in some way over Ukraine. If we piss them off enough, and we're like, hey, guess what? In the fall, we're leaving Afghanistan. Maybe not.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned the complexity of everything, because there's also an element of Pakistan, right? The element of Pakistan. Like, people are wondering whether or not Hamid Karzai is kind of holding the U.S. hostage when it comes to the BSA, because he wants more to be done on the issue of Pakistan and its relations with Afghanistan. So yeah, there are other factors at play, and I think that there is a very black and white presentation of this issue in the press. But what I always wonder about is what the future holds for other conflicts. Like, what kind of precedent does the situation in Afghanistan set? Because if we are able to spend 13 years in war and there are no real objectives at this point, what is the objective? Democracy? I mean, is there a democracy in Afghanistan? Is it safe to be in Afghanistan as a foreigner? 21 people died in an attack at a Lebanese restaurant in January. Just recently, just this week, a Swedish journalist was killed, shot in the head in broad daylight as he was doing an interview. At this point, the Taliban in Afghanistan has kind of shifted their tactics, and they're no longer just focusing on the military. They're focusing on foreigners. They're focusing on people that are supposed to be doing journalism there, and we haven't done anything to really change the way things work in the country. So I'm concerned about that.
Sure. Well, the Taliban have shifted their strategy because they've defeated the U.S. militarily in the country, and of course have catered their tactics to that. But Afghanistan, talking about looking forward, I mean, Afghanistan is an example that the politicians in Washington, our esteemed generals, these brave heroes in the Pentagon, are willing to send many, many thousands of young men and women from the United States to die and lose limbs in a war that they're just like, hey, I think we can capture this country. It should be easy. Let's go in. 15 years later, it was a complete disaster. Let's keep sending them. Maybe things will work out in our favor. But it's all under this larger foreign policy scheme of the goal is every country that is not within the U.S. sphere of economic and military influence must be brought into that sphere of influence. Sometimes it's done through predatory loans. Sometimes it's done through things like sanctions and economic warfare. But independent countries who don't acquiesce to the will of the United States, sometimes they can be taken militarily. There's a variety of different tactics, but that is the #1 underlying thing between all U.S. policy towards any country is how to bring it in to the sphere of U.S. banks and corporations. And look what's happening in Ukraine right now under this same policy, where the U.S. government is willing to sponsor the rise of open neo-Nazis and fascists in a new government in Ukraine, just to be able to say that this country is now going for U.S. contracts and loans and EU loans and IMF loans rather than those with Russia.
You can find a Taliban in every country. There's authoritarians and anti-democratic people and misogynists and murderers in every country. I mean, should the United States be the police force for the world? I mean, this is the question that's been debated for about 120 years now. Those of us who oppose that have been losing, generally, but that's the question at hand here. Right, of course there are bad things going on. There are anti-democratic forces around the world. There are people that I don't agree with, that I would never want to live under, but I don't want to change another people's country, another people's way of life at the point of a gun paid for by my taxes.
So Thaddeus, just one last question, and it goes to you. I want to know what you think the U.S.'s role should be in terms of foreign policy.
Out now. Completely.
In all cases?
Yeah, I mean, I would close all military bases outside the United States. I would bring home every single soldier from outside the United States tomorrow.